The emergency beacon screamed through the void like a dying star, its crimson pulse cutting through the debris field that had once been the merchant vessel Stellaris. Captain Jake Morrison pulled his salvage ship Phoenix closer to the wreckage, his weathered hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Another pirate raid," he muttered, scanning the twisted metal fragments floating in the darkness. The Keith Empire's raiders had grown bolder lately, hitting trade routes deeper into human space. But something was wrong with this scene. The debris pattern suggested an explosion from within, not an external attack. A faint heat signature caught his attention. Jake's heart skipped as he spotted a figure in an escape pod, half melted and spinning slowly among the wreckage. The pod's life support indicators flickered weakly, showing critical failure imminent. "Hang on," Jake whispered, maneuvering the Phoenix with the precision that had made him one of the best salvage operators in the sector. His mechanical arm, a souvenir from his military days, whirred as he extended the rescue tether. The pod's hatch hissed open, revealing a young woman, in elegant robes that spoke of wealth and status. Her skin held the pale luminescence of the Valthani nobility, and intricate silver circuitry traced delicate patterns along her temples, biotech integration that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But what stopped Jake cold were her eyes, pools of liquid starlight that held depths of terror, and something else, resignation. "Please," she whispered in accented standard, her voice barely audible over the pod's failing systems. "They're coming back." Jake didn't hesitate. He pulled her from the dying pod just as its power core gave a final explosive farewell. The shockwave rattled the Phoenix, but Jake had already sealed the airlock and was carrying the woman to his medical bay. She was unconscious by the time he laid her on the examination table. Jake's scanner revealed extensive burns across her left side and signs of neural trauma. Someone had been playing with her biotech. As he worked to stabilize her condition, applying healing gel and monitoring her vital signs, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple pirate raid. The woman's robes bore the insignia of House Valethris, one of the most powerful Valthani families in the galaxy. If she was who Jake suspected, her rescue could mean anything from a substantial reward to a death warrant, depending on who wanted her dead and why. When she finally awakened 3 hours later, her starlight eyes found his immediately. There was recognition there and fear, but also something that looked almost like gratitude mixed with profound sadness. "You saved me," she said softly, struggling to sit up despite Jake's gentle protests. "Why?" Jake frowned at the question. "Why wouldn't I? You were dying out there." A bitter smile crossed her delicate features. "Because I'm not worth saving. I'm Lyra of House Valethris, and I'm nothing but a pawn in a game I never wanted to play. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Sarge's Tales. Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi, tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you." "Everyone's worth saving," Jake said firmly, his military training overriding any political considerations. "And right now you're safe." Lyra's expression darkened. "No, Captain Morrison. Neither of us is safe. They used me as bait on you." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "The merchant vessel, the convenient debris field, my miraculous survival in a pod with just enough power to broadcast a distress signal, it was all arranged. They knew a human salvage captain wouldn't be able to resist playing hero." Her voice broke slightly. "They knew you'd come for me." Jake's blood ran cold as the implications sank in. "Who's they?" Lyra winced as she shifted position, her hand moving instinctively to the biotech nodes at her temples. "The Keth Empire has been planning something big. They needed to get close to human space without triggering your early warning systems. What better way than to use a distressed Valthani? Noble as bait for a human rescuer? You're telling me this whole thing was a setup to capture my ship?" Jake's mechanical arm clenched involuntarily, servos whining under the strain. "Not just your ship." Lyra's starlight eyes met his with desperate intensity. "They've been studying human behavior for months. They know about your species' compulsion to help others, even at personal cost. It's considered a weakness in Keth tactical doctrine. Jake laughed harshly. Our compassion is a weakness? To them, yes. The Keth believe survival of the fittest applies to species as well as individuals. They see human altruism as a genetic defect that makes you predictable and exploitable. The Phoenix's proximity alarm suddenly screamed to life. Jake lunged for the control console, his enhanced vision immediately picking out the massive shapes emerging from the asteroid field's shadow. 5 Keth destroyers, their hulls bristling with weapons, arranged in a perfect intercept formation. How long until they're in weapons range? Lyra asked, her training as nobility showing through her fear. 4 minutes, Jake replied, his fingers flying over the navigation controls. The Phoenix was fast for a salvage ship, but it was no match for military vessels. They must have been waiting for me to complete the rescue. The biotech in my temples, Lyra said urgently. It's not just for enhancement. It's a tracking device. They've been monitoring my location and vital signs this entire time. When my stress levels spiked during the rescue, it triggered their attack. Jake cursed in 3 languages, 2 of which weren't human. Can you disable it? Not without risking permanent brain damage. The integration runs too deep. Lyra's voice remained steady despite the circumstances. Captain, there's something else you need to know. I volunteered for this mission. The confession hit Jake harder than the incoming weapons lock alerts. You what? My younger brother is being held by the Keth. They promised to release him if I helped them capture a human ship and its crew intact. They want to study how humans think, how you make decisions under pressure. Tears began flowing down her pale cheeks. I never intended for you to actually save me. I thought you'd just scan the pod and move on. Jake's tactical training warred with his human nature. Every instinct screamed at him to view Lyra as a threat, a collaborator who had willingly endangered his life. But looking at her broken expression, he saw only a desperate sister trying to save her family. Your brother. How old? 12 years old. He was taken during a diplomatic mission to the neutral zones. The Keth said they'd send him back in pieces if I didn't cooperate. The first weapons blast rocked the Phoenix, overloading the rear shields. Jake threw power to the engines and began evasive maneuvers, but the Keth ships were closing fast. Their formation was textbook perfect. No escape routes, no blind spots. They're herding us toward the gravity well of that dead planet, Jake observed grimly. Once we get caught in its pull, we're sitting ducks. Lyra struggled to stand, her injuries making movement painful. There might be a way out of this, but you're not going to like it. I already don't like any of this. What have you got? The Keth believe humans are predictable because of your compassion. What if we prove them wrong? What if we show them that human unpredictability is actually your greatest strength? Jake spared her a quick glance while wrestling with the controls. Explain. Everything they know about human behavior comes from sanitized diplomatic encounters and military engagements. They've never seen a human pushed to the absolute limit, forced to make impossible choices. Lyra's voice grew stronger. They're expecting you to either surrender to save an innocent prisoner or sacrifice me to escape. They can't conceive of a third option. Another weapons blast sent the Phoenix tumbling. Jake regained control just as the gravity well began pulling. At his ship's hull. What third option? Lyra smiled, and for the first time since her rescue, the expression reached her starlight eyes. The one where we turn their trap into ours. You want to what? Jake stared at Lyra as if she'd suggested they juggle plasma grenades. Crash land on the planet's surface and make them come to us, she repeated calmly. The Phoenix has military-grade shields, doesn't it? From your service days? Decommissioned military surplus, yeah, but then we can survive atmospheric entry. The Keth ships are destroyers. They're built for space combat, not planetary operations. If we can get down there, we change the rules of engagement entirely. Jake yanked the ship hard to starboard as another volley of plasma bolts seared past the cockpit. Even if we survive the crash, what then? We're still trapped on a dead rock with 5 ships full of hostile aliens. That's where human ingenuity comes in. Lyra moved to the co-pilot seat, her aristocratic composure cracking slightly as she strapped in. The Keth tactical doctrine relies on overwhelming force and superior positioning. They don't know how to adapt when those advantages are removed. And you do? I've spent 2 years studying their military protocols as part of my diplomatic training. They're incredibly effective, but also rigid. Once they commit to a strategy, they rarely deviate. She gestured at the tactical display showing the 5 destroyers maintaining perfect formation, even as they pursued the Phoenix toward the planet. Look at them. They're still flying in standard intercept pattern, even though we're clearly not trying to escape anymore. Jake had to admit. She had a point. The Keth were maintaining textbook positioning, despite the fact that his ship was now diving straight toward the planet's atmosphere. Any human commander would have broken formation to adapt to the changing situation. Atmospheric entry in 30 seconds, Jake announced, transferring power from weapons to shields. This is going to get rough. The Phoenix hit the upper atmosphere like a meteor, her hull plating glowing cherry red as friction battled against reinforced ablative armor. Jake felt the ship bucking and shuddering around them, her frame groaning under stresses she was never designed to handle. But she held together, testament to human engineering and the stubborn refusal to build anything that couldn't survive being pushed beyond its limits. "Keth ships," Jake shouted over the roar of superheated air. Following. "Jazz down," Lyra reported, her hands steady on the sensor controls despite the violent shaking. "All 5 of them. They're taking atmospheric damage. Their hulls aren't designed for this kind of stress." "Good. Maybe we can thin the odds before we hit dirt." The planet's surface rushed up to meet them, a wasteland of crystalline formations and dried lake beds. Jake spotted what looked like the ruins of an ancient city and aimed for it, hoping the structures might provide some cover. The Phoenix hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before skidding to a halt in a cloud of pulverized crystal dust. Jake tasted blood where he'd bitten his tongue, and his mechanical arm sparked from a damaged servo, but they were alive. "Keth status?" he asked, running rapid systems checks. 2 ships managed to land intact, but they're scattered across the surface. One crashed about 5 kilometers south. Looks like their atmospheric shielding failed. The other 2 are trying to maintain orbit, but their hulls are compromised. Jake smiled grimly. "So we've reduced 5 ships to 2 functional ones, and those are damaged. Not bad odds." "It gets better," Lyra said, studying the long-range sensors. "The 2 landed ships are trying to coordinate a ground assault, but they're having communication problems. The planet's crystalline formations are interfering with their standard comm frequencies. While our equipment, human technology, is more adaptable, your ship's communications array is already compensating for the interference." There was something like admiration in her voice. "The Keth designed their systems for optimal efficiency under ideal conditions. Humans design yours to keep working. When everything goes wrong." Jake began pulling weapons and supplies from the ship's emergency lockers. "How long before they reach our position?" "At their current pace, about 2 hours. They're being cautious, probably calling for reinforcements." 2 hours to turn a broken salvage ship into a fortress. Jake shouldered his rifle and checked. The power cell. "Think it's enough time?" Lyra stood carefully, testing her balance. Despite her injuries, her royal training was showing through. She moved with purpose and determination. "Captain, there's something you should understand about the Keth. They've conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, but they've never faced anything like humans." "What do you mean?" "Every other species they've defeated either surrendered when faced with superior force or fought to the death in predictable patterns. But humans," she paused, searching for the right words, "humans adapt. You take impossible situations and find ways to turn them to your advantage. The Keth have no experience dealing with that kind of tactical flexibility." Jake was already moving, his mind cataloging the ship's resources and the surrounding terrain. "Then let's give them an education they'll never forget." As they prepared their defenses, Lyra watched Jake work with growing amazement. Where other species might have despaired at their situation, the human was already turning their crashed ship into a tactical advantage, using the crystalline formations to create choke points and the ancient ruins to establish overlapping fields. "Hellfire, your brother," Jake said suddenly as he rigged an improvised explosive from the ship's power cells. "What's his name?" "Kai." "Why?" "Because when we get out of this, we're going to get him back." The first Keith patrol approached the crashed Phoenix exactly 97 minutes after landing. Jake watched them through his rifle scope from a concealed position among the crystal formations, counting their numbers and noting their equipment. 12 soldiers, standard assault configuration, he whispered into his comm unit. They're moving in textbook formation, no adaptation for the terrain. Lyra's voice crackled back from her position near the ship. Just like I predicted. They're treating this like a standard boarding action, not a ground assault. Jake had to admire the aliens' discipline, even as he prepared to exploit it. The Keth moved with mechanical precision, their insectoid forms encased in matte black armor that should have made them nearly invisible against the crystalline landscape. But their formation was designed for corridor fighting aboard spacecraft, tight groupings that maximized mutual support while minimizing exposure to weapons fire from predictable angles. On a planet's surface, with cover provided by irregularly shaped crystal outcroppings and ancient ruins, that same formation became a liability. Initiating Plan Alpha, Jake whispered, then triggered the first of his improvised mines. The explosion sent crystal shards flying like 1,000 knives, but the Keith armor held. What it couldn't protect against was the tactical confusion. The blast separated the lead element from their support squad, and Jake immediately capitalized on the opening. His first shot took down the patrol leader, a clean hit to the helmet that shorted out the aliens' environmental systems. The return fire was immediate and intense, but it came from exactly where Jake had expected. The Keth were reacting according to their training, establishing a defensive perimeter and calling for backup. Second patrol moving in from the east, Lyra reported. 16 soldiers this time. They're trying to flank around the ruins. Let them come, Jake replied, already moving to his second position. Remember, we're not trying to win a straight fight. We just need to make them think differently. The second engagement played out much like the first. The Keth advanced with textbook precision, their movements coordinated and efficient. But Jake had turned the ancient ruins into a maze of false paths and kill zones, using the irregular architecture to break up their formations and force them into individual duels rather than coordinated assaults. What impressed Jake most was how quickly Lyra adapted to the situation. Despite her injuries and lack of military training, she managed their communications and sensor equipment with growing efficiency, feeding him real-time intelligence on enemy positions and movements. Third wave incoming, she announced, but this time they're doing something different. Jake paused his relocation to listen. Different how? They've stopped advancing. The remaining forces are establishing a perimeter around our position, but they're not coming closer. I think they're waiting for something. Reinforcements from orbit? No, the damaged ships are barely maintaining their positions. I think, Lyra paused, her voice uncertain. I think they're trying to understand what happened to their first 2 patrols. Jake smiled grimly. They're learning. The question is, are they learning fast enough? His answer came in the form of a new tactical approach. Instead of direct assaults, the Keth began probing their defenses with small units, testing response times and weapon positions. It was more cautious than their previous attempts, but it also revealed something crucial about their mindset. They're treating us like a technical problem to be solved, Jake observed, after repelling the 4th probe. Not opponents to be defeated. What's the difference? A technical problem has a correct solution. You analyze the variables, apply the appropriate doctrine, and achieve the desired result. But opponents, especially human opponents, don't behave like technical problems. We cheat. As if to prove his point, Jake triggered his final surprise. A series of charges he'd placed in the crystal formations surrounding their position. The explosions didn't cause much damage, but they sent tons of crystal debris cascading down into the valleys where the Keth forces were positioned, forcing them to relocate and breaking up their carefully planned siege. How many are left? Jake asked, as he reloaded his rifle. Sensors show approximately 30 soldiers still active, but they're scattered and trying to regroup. And Captain... Lyra's voice carried a note of amazement. The orbital ships have changed position. They're moving away from the planet. Retreating. I don't think so. I think they're calling for help. Jake considered this information. In 3 hours of fighting, he'd managed to neutralize roughly half of the enemy ground forces, while suffering no casualties himself. More importantly, He'd forced them to abandon their tactical doctrine and begin improvising, something they clearly weren't comfortable with. "The question is," he said aloud, "do we wait for reinforcements to arrive or do we take the initiative?" "What do you mean?" Jake was already moving, gathering his equipment for a rapid redeployment. "I mean, we've been playing defense long enough. Time to show these aliens what happens when you corner a human." "That sounds incredibly dangerous. Lyra, your people have a saying about humans, don't they? Something about how we approach impossible odds." She was quiet for a moment. "We say humans don't see impossible odds. They just see odds that haven't been beaten yet." "Exactly. And right now, I've got 30 confused, demoralized aliens scattered across unfamiliar terrain, cut off from their command structure, and trying to figure out how their textbook tactics failed so completely." Jake shouldered his pack and checked his weapons one final time. "That's not impossible odds. That's an opportunity." "To do what?" "To get your brother back." Jake's plan was audacious, even by human standards. Instead of continuing to defend their position, he intended to assault the landed Keth ships directly, using the confusion caused by their earlier encounters to get close enough to board one of the vessels. "You realize this is exactly the kind of unpredictable behavior they're trying to study," Lyra pointed out, as they moved through the crystal formations toward the nearest. "Enemy ship." "Good," Jake replied, his enhanced vision scanning for motion in the alien landscape. "Let them study this. Humans don't just adapt to circumstances, we create new circumstances." The first Keth ship sat in a crater of its own making, its hull scarred by atmospheric entry, but otherwise intact. Jake counted 6 guards patrolling the perimeter, a standard security detail that assumed the primary threat would come from organized ground forces, not 2 individuals moving with stealth through difficult terrain. "Shift change in 12 minutes, Lyra whispered, monitoring their communications. "The new guards will be fresh and alert. Then we go in 11 minutes. Jake finished his preparations, checking the improvised charges he'd constructed from the Phoenix's emergency supplies. "Remember, once we're inside, your knowledge of Keth protocols is our biggest advantage, assuming they follow standard procedures." "They will. That's their weakness. They can't help themselves. Even when their tactics are failing, they stick to doctrine because it's all they know." The assault began with Jake's trademark combination of precision and unpredictability. He eliminated the perimeter guards with silent efficiency, using the crystalline terrain to mask his approach until it was too late for them to react. The ship's automated defenses never activated because the guards never had time to trigger them. Inside the Keth vessel, Jake found himself in an environment designed for beings with very different physiology. The corridors were too narrow for comfort, the lighting spectrum was wrong for human eyes, and the gravity felt subtly off, probably calibrated for the Keith homeworld. "This way," Lyra whispered, her aristocratic education finally proving useful. "Bridge should be forward and up 2 levels. They encountered their first internal patrol at the main junction. 3 Keth soldiers in full combat armor, moving with the mechanical precision that characterized their species. Jake didn't try to fight them. Instead, he triggered one of his charges in a side corridor, causing enough noise and confusion to draw them away from their patrol route. "Classic misdirection," he murmured as they slipped past the empty junction. "Works on every species I've encountered." The ship's bridge was a testament to Keth efficiency, every surface covered with displays, and controls everything optimized for maximum functionality, with minimal wasted space. Unfortunately, it was also occupied by the ship's command crew. 4 officers, no Marines, Jake observed through the partially open hatch. They're trying to re-establish contact with their scattered ground forces. "And failing," Lyra added, listening to their communications. "The crystal interference is worse than they anticipated. They can't coordinate their remaining troops." Jake's plan crystallized with sudden clarity. "We don't need to capture this ship. We need to convince them to recall their forces." "How do we do that?" "By making them think they're facing a much larger threat than 2 people with improvised weapons." Jake began placing his remaining charges at strategic points throughout the corridor. What would make a Keth commander abandon a mission and retreat to seek reinforcements? Lyra considered the question. Evidence of organized resistance, superior technology, or She paused, understanding dawning in her starlight eyes. A trap they can't escape from. Exactly. Right now they think they're dealing with an anomaly, one unusually resourceful human who's managed to disrupt their operations, through luck and desperation. But if they start believing they've walked into a carefully planned ambush, Jake triggered the first set of charges, causing explosions throughout the ship's lower levels. Not enough to destroy the vessel, but sufficient to suggest coordinated sabotage. The bridge crew's communications immediately became frantic as damage. Reports flooded in from multiple locations. Now the second set, Jake said, activating charges near the ship's main power conduits. The lights flickered, and several non-critical systems shut down. And finally, the third set of explosions disabled the ship's primary communications array, cutting off their contact with both the orbital vessels and the scattered ground forces. In the space of 3 minutes, Jake had transformed a functional military ship into a damaged vessel trapped on hostile terrain with no way to call for help. They're preparing to evacuate, Lyra reported, monitoring the crew's increasingly desperate communications. But listen to this. They're not just calling back their troops. They're requesting immediate extraction for all personnel, Jake smiled. Because from their perspective, they've lost contact with 2 patrols, had their remaining forces scattered by unexplained explosions, and now their command ship is under attack by enemies who can strike anywhere with apparent impunity. They think there's an entire human military unit down here. Better than that, they think there's an entire human military unit that's been waiting for them. This wasn't a rescue mission that went wrong. It was a trap they walked into. As they made their way off the damaged ship, Jake could see the effects of his psychological warfare. The remaining Keth forces were abandoning their positions and converging on the 2 landing sites, preparing for immediate evacuation. Their careful siege had collapsed into a panicked retreat. The orbital ships are moving in for pickup, Lyra observed. They'll have everyone off the surface within the... How good, that gives us time for Phase 2. Phase 2. Jake was already moving toward the second landed Keth ship, his stride confident, despite their impossible circumstances. The part where we commandeer one of their vessels and go rescue your brother. Lyra stopped walking. Jake, that's insane. Even if we could capture a ship, we don't know where Kai is being held. The Keth Empire spans hundreds of systems. But you do know, Jake said gently. The biotech in your temples isn't just tracking your location. It's been recording everything you've seen and heard, including whatever intelligence briefings they gave you about this mission. Understanding dawned in her starlight eyes. The neural interface can access those memories, but it would require connecting to a Keth computer system, which we'll have once we take that ship. Jake's expression was determined, but kind. I told you we were going to get your brother back, I meant it. The second Keth ship proved easier to infiltrate than the first. The evacuation was proceeding with typical alien efficiency, but the crew was focused on retrieving their scattered ground forces rather than maintaining security protocols. Jake and Lyra slipped aboard during the confusion of loading wounded soldiers. Medical bay first, Jake whispered, as they moved through the ship's corridors. I need you connected to their computer system, but safely. The Keth medical facilities were as precisely organized as everything else about their culture. Jake found what he was looking for, a neural interface console designed for treating biotech-related injuries. With some creative rewiring of his own cybernetic components, he managed to create a buffer between Lyra's implants and the ship's main computer. This is going to hurt, he warned as he activated the connection. Lyra's body went rigid as the alien system interfaced with her biotech. Data flowed across the medical displays in streams of incomprehensible symbols, but gradually patterns began to emerge. Images, locations, strategic assessments. Everything the Keth had shared with her during her briefings. I can see it, she gasped, her hands clenched against the neural feedback. Kai is being held on a research station in the Helix Nebula. They're studying him, trying to understand human developmental psychology. Jake's mechanical arm whirred as his fist clenched. How many guards? 12 researchers, minimal security. They don't consider one human child a significant threat. Lyra's voice carried bitter irony. They're about to learn otherwise, and you access their navigation systems from here. Already done. I'm downloading star charts, security codes, even personnel records. The flow of data intensified, causing Lyra to gasp in pain. Jake, there's something else. This wasn't just about capturing a human ship. They're planning a major offensive against human space. How major? 300 ships targeting your primary trade routes and industrial centers. They want to cripple human civilization before you can adapt to their tactics. Lyra's starlight eyes met his with desperate urgency. The attack begins in 6 days. Jake processed this information with military efficiency. A threat of that magnitude couldn't be ignored, but it also couldn't be stopped by 2 people in a stolen ship. However, the intelligence Lyra was gathering could be invaluable if they could get it to human authorities. Download everything, he decided. Navigation, fleet positions, tactical plans, all of it. The neural load might be too much. I could suffer permanent brain damage. Your choice, Jake said simply. But if we don't get this information to the right people, millions of humans are going to die. Lyra didn't hesitate. Do it. The data transfer pushed her biotech to its limits, but aristocratic training and sheer determination kept her conscious as terabytes of classified Keth intelligence flowed through her neural interface. When it was finally complete, she collapsed, blood trickling from her nose and ears. Status? Jake asked, supporting her weight as she recovered. Everything's here. Fleet compositions, timetables, target priorities. Your military intelligence people are going to have a field day. She smiled weakly. Assuming we survive long enough to deliver it. We will. Jake was already moving toward the ship's control systems. Because we're about to give the Keth Empire a demonstration of human capabilities they'll never forget. Taking control of the alien vessel required every bit of Jake's technical expertise and military training. The controls were designed for different physiology and operated on unfamiliar principles, but human adaptability proved equal to the challenge. Within minutes, he had the ship responding to his commands. Where are we going first? Lyra asked, as Jake prepared to break orbit. The research station. We get your brother, then we head for human space with this intelligence. Jake's expression was grim, but determined. But first, we're going to send a message to the Keth fleet. What kind of message? Instead of answering, Jake activated the ship's weapons systems and targeted the remaining Keth vessels still in orbit. The first salvo caught them completely off guard. Their own ship attacking them was so far outside their tactical doctrine that they couldn't respond effectively. Jake, what are you doing? Teaching them that humans don't just adapt to circumstances, he replied as the second volley disabled another enemy ship. We create new ones. The surviving Keth vessels finally began returning fire, but Jake was already breaking orbit, using the planet's gravity well to slingshot toward deep space. Behind them, the damaged enemy ships struggled to pursue, their commanders trying to process how their carefully planned operation had turned into a complete disaster. They'll report back to their superiors, Lyra observed as they jumped to hyperspace. They'll know that humans are more dangerous than they calculated. Good, Jake said. Let them know, because when their invasion fleet arrives in human space, they're going to find out that today was just a preview. As the stolen ship raced toward the Helix Nebula, Jake allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. In the space of a few hours, he'd turned a simple rescue mission into an intelligence coup that could save millions of lives. The Keth Empire had intended to use human compassion as a weapon against humanity. Instead, they'd just learned why compassion backed by human ingenuity was the most dangerous force in the galaxy. The research station orbiting the gas giant Helix Prime was exactly what Jake had expected, a sterile monument to clinical efficiency where the Keth conducted their experiments on lesser species. What he hadn't expected was how easy it would be to approach using one of their own ships. They're not even questioning our identity codes, Lyra observed as they docked with the station. The stolen ship's transponder is giving us complete access. Overconfidence, Jake replied, checking his weapons one final time. They can't conceive of someone actually stealing one of their vessels and using it against them. The station's interior was a maze of laboratories and holding cells, each one containing specimens from across the galaxy. Jake felt his anger building. As they passed cell after cell of sentient beings, reduced to research subjects, but he forced himself to focus on the mission. Kai should be in Research Wing 7, Lyra said, consulting the station schematics she'd downloaded. But Jake, there are over 300 prisoners here. We can't just rescue my brother and leave the others. Jake had been thinking the same thing. The tactical part of his mind warned that attempting to rescue everyone would compromise their mission and likely get them all killed. But the human part of his mind, the part that had compelled him to rescue Lyra in the first place, wouldn't let him abandon innocent beings to alien experimentation. We free them all, he decided. But your brother first. Research Wing 7 was a nightmare of clinical precision. Keth scientists moved between examination rooms with the same mechanical efficiency they applied to everything else, treating their subjects like laboratory equipment rather than living beings. Jake counted 12 researchers and only 4 security guards, exactly as Lyra had predicted. They found Kai in Examination Room 3, strapped to a table while alien instruments monitored his brain activity. The 12-year-old boy looked small and fragile among the imposing alien machinery, but his eyes held the same starlight quality as his sister's, along with a defiance that reminded Jake why humans had survived every challenge the galaxy had thrown at them. Lyra. Kai's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the room like a shout. I'm here, little brother, Lyra said, her aristocratic composure finally cracking as she rushed to free him from the restraints. I'm here and we're going home. The reunion was brief but emotional. Jake allowed them 30 seconds, then gently reminded them that they were still in the middle of a heavily guarded research facility. Can you walk? He asked Kai. I can run, the boy replied with fierce determination. Are we rescuing everyone else too? Jake smiled. Definitely human. That's the plan. Think you can help? Kai's response was to grab one of the Keth neural interface devices and begin examining its controls. Within minutes, he'd figured out how to access the station's security systems. 12 years old, Jake muttered admiringly, and he's already reverse engineering alien technology. Human children are remarkably adaptable, Lyra observed. It's probably what the Keth were trying to study. Too bad they're about to get a first-hand demonstration instead of a clinical one. Jake's plan was characteristically human in its audacity. Instead of trying to sneak the prisoners out quietly, he decided to turn the research station's own systems against its operators. With Kai's help, he accessed the facility's central computer and began implementing what he privately called Operation Chaos. Every cell door in the station just opened, Kai reported with obvious satisfaction. And I've disabled their internal communications system. Security response? Jake asked. Confused, Lyra replied, monitoring the guards' radio chatter. They're getting reports of escaped prisoners from every wing simultaneously, but they can't. Coordinator response. Jake had seen this kind of systematic breakdown before during his military service. The Keth had designed their security protocols around the assumption that any escape attempt would be small-scale and localized. The possibility of a station-wide prison break was so far outside their operational parameters that their response systems were collapsing under the strain. Phase 2, Jake announced, moving toward the station's main power core. We're going to give every prisoner a chance to get off this station. How? The Keth have been studying dozens of species, but they made one critical error. They assumed that superior technology automatically means superior tactics. Jake began placing his remaining explosives at strategic points around the power distribution center. They never considered what happens when you give a bunch of angry, intelligent beings a common enemy and the tools to fight back. The explosions Jake triggered didn't destroy the power core, but they did something more tactically valuable. They overloaded the station's automated systems while leaving the life support and artificial gravity functional. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in red, and the air filled with the sounds of alarms and confused alien voices. Evacuation pods are launching, Lyra reported, but not with Keth personnel, with prisoners. Jake watched through the station's external sensors as escape pod after escape pod ejected from the facility, each one carrying former captives toward freedom. The Keth security forces were trying to stop the exodus, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the breakout. How many got away? He asked. 237 prisoners successfully evacuated, Kai replied, his young face glowing with pride. 68 different species, including some I've never seen before. And the Keth? 43 researchers and security personnel remaining on station. They're barricaded in the command center, trying to call for help. Jake smiled grimly. Let them call. By the time help arrives, we'll be long gone, and they'll have to explain to their superiors how 2 humans and a 12-year-old boy liberated an entire research facility. As they made their way back to their captured ship, Jake reflected on the day's events. What had started as a simple rescue mission had evolved into something far more significant, a demonstration of human capabilities that would reverberate throughout the Keith Empire and beyond. The intelligence we gathered, Lyra said as they prepared to depart. It's going to change everything, isn't it? It's going to give humanity a fighting chance, Jake replied. The Keth planned their invasion based on the assumption that humans are predictable and limited by our compassion. Now they know better. Will it be enough? Kai asked. Jake looked at the young boy who had just helped orchestrate one of the most audacious prison breaks in galactic history, then at his sister who had risked everything to save him, and finally at the escape pods scattered across the system, carrying hundreds of liberated prisoners. Kid, he said with absolute certainty, when humans decide to fight for something they believe in, enough is whatever we decide to make it. As their stolen ship jumped into hyperspace, heading for human space with intelligence that could prevent a war, Jake knew that the Keith Empire had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had sought to exploit human compassion as a weakness, but instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous: human determination. The coming conflict would test humanity's resolve like never before, but Jake was confident in the outcome. The Keith might have superior numbers and technology, but they had never faced an enemy that could turn apparent weaknesses into strengths, transform desperate situations into opportunities, and inspire hope in the darkest circumstances. They were about to learn why, across the galaxy, when other species encountered impossible odds, they had a saying: "Fight like a human," and humanity was just getting started. The end.